Welcome to the No Mom is an Island podcast. As moms, we often long for moments of being alone, but the truth is sometimes we feel downright lonely. The intention of this podcast is to show you that you aren't alone, that we all experience similar things along this mothering journey. If you enjoy this podcast, please stay tuned after the interview to hear of 3 easy ways you can help this podcast continue. If you enjoy this podcast, please stay tuned after the interview to hear of 3 easy ways you can help this podcast continue. You can also find those ways in the podcast's episode description below. Well, multitasking masters, whatever you are doing while you listen to this podcast, we hope you enjoy hearing the story of another mom. Today we welcome Denise. Hello, Denise. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, thank you. So thank you for being willing to be on the podcast.
You're welcome. No problem. I've been listening to it for a few weeks now and I've been enjoying it.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for listening to it. So why don't you tell us about your family?
Okay, so I am Denise, and I have been married to my husband Tim for 16 years. We have 5 kids. We have Rachel, who's 10, and Catherine, or we call her Katie, who's 8. And we have boy-girl twins, Megan and Jesse, who are 4, and Lydia is 2.
Okay, so were you surprised by twins, or is that something that runs in your family?
No, we were quite surprised. I had an early ultrasound, and they said there's 2 sacks in here. And the girl doing the ultrasound was a trainee, and her person that she was working for was out of the room. So I thought to myself, well, maybe she made a mistake. And so the person came back in the room, and she's like, "There's 2 here, right?" And she's like, "Oh yeah, there is." So yeah. So my husband wasn't able to be at that ultrasound, and so I called him, and he's like, "You're making me nervous that you're calling."
Yeah.
So
you're like, well,
he said to call if anything was wrong.
Right.
So.
You're like, well, there's nothing wrong, but there is something different. Right. So that would have been your 3rd pregnancy. So you were expecting to go from 2 children to 3 children, and now you're going from 2
exactly.
to 4. Right.
And what's funny is my husband and I always were like, maybe 3 or 4. And then Lord answered that question, and we went straight from 2 to 4.
Yes.
And then the Lord just put on our hearts that we weren't done, and He blessed us with number 5.
Oh, that's wonderful. All right, so why don't you tell us your parenting perspective?
Okay. Well, growing up and into high school, college, I always wanted to be a mom, but I wasn't quite sure. Like, once we did start trying, we got married young, and so we took a few years. I was actually still in college, so I finished college and worked a little bit, and then once we started trying, it wasn't as easy as we thought it would be. So that dream, I wasn't quite sure if it was going to become a reality, and so it took about a little over 2 years for us to get pregnant with Rachel.
Okay.
And so it was a blessing that we could. And it's amazing looking back at that. Now that we have, it took us a while to get pregnant with her, and now we're blessed with 5 kids. And I've also been blessed to be a stay-at-home mom, and that's been a blessing to us. My perspective is that my children, first and foremost, belong to the Lord. And that helps, especially in the worries, the little worries and the big worries.
Right.
Sometimes it comes across your mind like, oh, what if they get sick? What if something happens to them? And it's just such a comfort knowing that the Lord loves them even more than I do.
Right.
And, they're kind of on loan to us from Him.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that it does provide comfort for all of the what if scenarios that we can come up with in our minds, or as they get older and they push out a little bit further from our side, and that does provide comfort for the worries of what can happen when they're not so close to us anymore.
Exactly. The worries, I feel like the worries are always there. They just change, because I'm at the point where I still have little ones at home. With the 2-year-old and the 4-year-old, but then my other 2 are off at school. So, they're being exposed to things at school with friends and whatnot. And so I've been noticing that there's always the temptation to have worries, but they just they change as they get older.
Right. I think the concerns are very natural. I think that being able to put them in proper perspective is the difference, that we have the
Exactly.
comfort of who they truly belong to, and it's not us. And we can't protect from everything, and it's not necessarily our role to protect from everything.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, we need to be wise and we need to keep them safe, but there's just so much we can do,
Right. Right. All right. So then, what is your mothering philosophy?
Well, I kind of had to laugh about this one because in my mom's group, I was asked to do a panel last year, and this was one of the questions was like, what kind of mom are you? And it took me a really long time. I was just like, I actually Googled it, and I took a quiz on what kind of mom are you? And it came back saying I'm the whatever goes mom. And that kind of took me off guard because then I felt like, am I just wishy-washy? Like, when I think about it, like practically speaking, I think that does apply to me. Like in the practical things, I've done so many different things, and it is kind of whatever works. Like I had a C-section with my first. I had VBACs with the rest of them. I've had epidural births. I've had non-epidural births. I've breastfed some. I've bottle fed some. I've co-slept with some. I've had them sleep in their crib, and I've let some of them cry it out. I've rocked them to sleep. So practically speaking, I think I've tried to be just kind of low key and just kind of like not firm and say this is the only way because there are so many other different ways. And it's not going to kill your baby that, give them formula or, I try to encourage other young moms, especially first-time moms, that it's okay. It might not be, my birth plan for my first baby was not that I was going to have an emergency C-section at 33 weeks in New Jersey. Like I was visiting my family and, my water broke. And that was not a birth plan, but you have to do what works and how the best way to take care of the child.
Right. Well, and you also, being the mother of 5, that each of your children has different personalities and they respond in different ways. And that started when they were born or maybe even before. Because I know I have 4 children and they're all very different. And what is appropriate and works with one is not necessarily what works with the other. There can't be just one way.
Exactly. And that's like in my overall parenting, it's to teach them, the verse to love the Lord your God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. And that's the overall.
Right.
So then in terms of discipline, if you have that overall structure, in terms of discipline, one thing might not work for one kid. Like my first was a strong-willed child, and it took us sometimes hours and hours to work things out with her. And our next one was just kind of wild and just bad a lot, but like when we disciplined her, she was very quick to repent. And so it was just 2 totally different kids. And we had the overall goal of parenting, but sometimes that parenting looks different.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's encouraging and helpful, particularly for first-time mothers or mothers of very small children to hear that like, you don't have to have it all figured out. And that, like if you have a general, like the idea to teach my children to love the Lord their God with all their heart and then to love their neighbor as themselves. That's an overarching principle that then gets carried out in sometimes very different ways depending on the child, and not only depending on the child, but also depending on the stage of the child, because as they get older things change too. And so I think it's helpful for us all to be reminded not to get too stuck in like there's only one way to do this or
And it was funny when we were first teaching that verse to the children, having to explain them that our neighbors are not just the people who live next door to us.
Right.
Your neighbor actually is your brother or sister who are you not being kind to. And so this verse applies to them as well.
Your neighbor is also the person down the hall, not just down the street.
Exactly. Or sharing a room with you.
Yes, right.
That's usually the hardest one for them to get along with.
I know. Yeah, we deal with that too. And our kids share bedrooms too, which I don't think I would change even if I had more bedrooms, just because I think it's a good growing up experience and learning how to share space with other people. But yeah, sometimes you're like, it's really not as hard as you're making it.
Yeah, hopefully down the road, if they go to college, they'll be a good, conscientious roommate then
Yes.
because they've learned how to live with someone,
Right.
hopefully.
Right. All right. Well, what has been your favorite thing to teach your children or to watch them learn?
Again, I kind of have like a practically, I love watching them, like when they're little, learning how to crawl, how to walk. It's just, I don't know, it's just really exciting for me. I've had some early walkers, so I'm like, I go back and forth. I'm like, do I want to encourage this or not?
Who was the earliest, and how early were they?
I think Lydia was the earliest, and she pulled up to standing the day before she turned 7 months, and she started walking at 9.5.
Wow, yeah, that is really early.
So yeah, and she's been, I think, because she's number 5, she's been the earliest to do everything.
Okay.
You know, she's only 2 and she's talking in full sentences. So
she has to keep up.
She does. Yeah. And more seriously, just watching them learn about God, and we try to do like the children's catechism with them, and it's amazing the conversations that come up, like just at the lunch table through those scriptures. And we, like, when we put them to bed, we sing hymns with them. And Lydia, who's only 2 now, like, she asked for Amazing Grace, and she can sing the words with me and whatnot. And then what's really sweet is then when we are in church and they sing a hymn that we know, like especially Megan, my 4-year-old, just belts it out. Aww. And it's just really, really sweet.
That's really cute. All right, on the other side then, what's your least favorite thing to teach them or watch them learn?
Well, another, practically speaking, is, and I've heard a few other people on your podcast say this, potty training.
Yes. It's a common theme.
Yeah, I had a good friend of mine who has older children tell me the 2 hardest things with parenting were potty training and teaching them how to drive.
Oh, I so agree. We're just at the learning to drive stage, and I was like,
that?
Yes, and I was like, oh, this is hard.
Yeah, I mean, your lives are in their hands.
Yes. As are everybody else near them.
Yes.
Yeah, it's terrifying.
I said to her, at least we have a few years in between those 2.
That's true.
Yeah, and potty training the twins was definitely a challenge.
Yes.
You have 2 kids the same age, but it's amazing just to see the different. Everybody told me, because I only have 1 boy, Jesse, and everybody told me boys are different, they're harder. And when they turned 3, I tried them both, and Megan potty trained in a week. And then Jesse, we tried and tried and tried, and almost 1 year later, like, he was pushing 4 when he finally got it. There are still some days that I hear him going to the bathroom, and I'm like, is this really happening? Is he really potty trained? And then hopefully Lydia might be a few weeks before she turned 2, she was asking to go on the potty, and so she was trying. We're kind of just doing it low key with her right now, but it's kind of exciting because she's my last.
Yes. You're last in the potty trainings, and you still have all 5 to drive.
Yeah. I know. No more diapers.
Yeah, that will be wonderful.
More seriously, and I know a few people have said this too, is relationships. And I'm definitely seeing this with my older girls and their relationship with each other, like how to treat each other, and relationships with friends, coming home and saying, so-and-so said she's not my best friend anymore. Yeah. And I mean, this is starting in 2nd grade. Yes. And I'm like, it just breaks my heart. And I don't want to be that mom, but I do want to be that mom that like calls up the other mom and is like, what happened? Why aren't the girls speaking to each other? And, but
it's so hard.
Yeah.
And, as mom, I think so many times, at least for me, I want to try to fix it. And sometimes that's not the lesson to be learned there. It's not for me to just fix it. Some of it is for them to figure out what it means to love people like Jesus does. And it doesn't mean that they're loving back, and
exactly.
We've had that with some of our children where we've encouraged them to continue to be kind, the other person not being nice. And, my one child was kind for years to this other child, while this other child continued to, it kind of depended on the day. Sometimes the other person was nice and sometimes they weren't. And, it wasn't very predictable. And we just told her to just just keep being nice. That's what Jesus tells us to do, to be kind, to continue to be kind. The other person doesn't even have to deserve it. That's not what Jesus models for us. And the beautiful thing is that we have seen, it took several years, but we have seen it come around to the other side where that person is not mean to her anymore. And just the testimony she's been able to be because she continued to choose to love like Jesus. But it's so hard.
That's a really good reminder and thing to put in front of my girls. And sometimes it's with each other that, when they're fighting and one of them is saying, well, she's not being nice to me. And, and sometimes I'm not sure what to say. And I'm just like, well, you need to pray for your sister.
Right.
Like we can't fix her. Only the Lord can. The Lord needs to change her heart and needs to work in her attitude towards you. And
right. I had one of my children say something to me about, I actually don't know if he said it to me or if I just heard him say it, something about like that someone didn't deserve his respect. And I was like, wait a minute, that's not the way it works. I said, respect is something you give because of your character. Admiration or the ability to be influenced by that person is earned, but the respect is something you give because it's the right thing to do. And just to try to help them see the difference, because our culture tells us, only respect if that person deserves the respect or has earned your respect. And that's not the way it works. Like, you're supposed to show respect to other people because they are also created in the image of God. Now, whether you let them influence you or whether you admire them, that's a different story. But the respect is supposed to be there regardless.
Exactly. Because they are, another person created in God's image, like you said.
Right. And showing respect shows your character more so than the other person's. And both of those, like the being kind to the person who's unkind to you and the showing respect regardless of whether it's deserved or not, are very countercultural. And I've had other parents argue with me about that. It's like, no, I want my child to stand up for themselves. And I'm like, well, that's not always what Jesus is showing us. So difficult lessons for sure.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so what would you consider a high moment in parenting where you were like, I've got this? Now, you definitely have to have one of these because with 5 kids, there are moments where you're like, I actually accomplished this with 5 kids.
I think overall, it's any time I can do anything with all 5 kids.
Mm-hmm.
If I go to the store and get back in one piece and everybody's still with me and alive.
Yes.
Especially in the first year when Lydia was little and the twins were only 2.5 when Lydia was born.
Right. They were little.
That's still a lot of, just getting in and out of the car and getting coats on and, it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
If anything, and it's gotten easier and it's almost easier for me to go someplace with all 5 of them than just with the 3 littles.
Yes.
Because my older girls can help get them in and out of car seats and whatnot. But I've got to say, actually, it just happened on Mother's Day. My kids were so sweet, and on Mother's Day, like, all I had to do was get myself ready for church.
Aww.
Like, it was amazing. I had time to, like, do my hair, because they were like, Mom, don't come downstairs, don't come downstairs.
Aww.
And I came downstairs, and they had made breakfast, and everybody was dressed, shoes on, hair was done. My oldest, Rachel, had done the little girl's hair, and it was so nice. We were actually early for church because everybody had cooperated with each other, and because a lot of times my older will try to help change the other ones, and they are like, I want Mom, I want Mom. So they all cooperated, and so that was really like a really great way to start Mother's Day. And I kind of like, I'm like, oh, I'm getting a taste for like what it might be in a few years when they're a little bit older. But on the other hand, sorry, this is like a little bit of advice that
That's okay.
I try to like stay in the moment. Like, as my kids get older, I've tried not to wish them out of a stage. I thought this when my first was little, because sometimes it's like, oh, I can't wait till they can sit up. I can't wait till they can crawl. I can't wait till they'll walk. And it kind of took me back, and I was just like, you know what? There are hard things and there are great things about every stage. So I just need to stay in the moment and recognize with the hard things, like, we're not always going to be in this stage. It will get easier, and not try to just wish it away, because I'm like, down the road when I have all this time to get myself ready and the kids I'm going to miss the time, I may not think I'm going to miss it now, but I will.
Yeah, that's very true. All right, what about a low moment where if you were able to have the humorous perspective of it in the moment, where like, oh, my kids are going to need counseling.
I think almost the whole first year of having 5 kids.
Mm.
It was hard.
Yeah.
That whole like 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock.
Yes.
People call it the witching hour.
Mm-hmm.
My girls are getting home from school and they need homework and everybody needs something. My husband doesn't get home from work until 6. I spend a lot of time just kind of on my knees crying. And I specifically remember when January before Lydia turned 1, my husband and I had just had our 15-year anniversary. So my in-laws and parents graciously, we split up the kids and they watched our kids for a week and we went away on a cruise, which was amazing.
Yes.
But I got so spoiled that, I didn't even have to think about myself. And like, if I made a mess, somebody else was cleaning up. So I come home and it was just like a slap in the face. I was just like, oh my goodness. Now I need to take care of myself and then all these 5 little ones who need everything. So it was just such an adjustment back. So that like week and a half was really, really hard. I almost am like, was it really even worth going away?
Yeah. The adjustment was so
that
difficult.
Reintroduction back. But you know what? All that being said is, you learn more and more just to rely on the Lord's strength.
Right.
And it's great to have, good friends that you can just, so many times do I just text a friend and say, hey, can you pray for me? I'm having a really hard day. Or, a lot of times that kind of SOS prayer goes out a few times. Some of us all like mass text a few of us and we're like, and usually one of them is having a good day or, sometimes they are, so they can encourage me and whatnot.
Right. All right. What would you consider a favorite mothering story?
I had a dear friend, Wendy, who actually since passed away. She had ALS. She was 60. So she was older than me and she was more like a mentor to me. And with, I'd say, 3 out of 4 of my pregnancies, I struggled with postpartum depression and anxiety afterwards at different points. Like one time it was even a year after the baby was born. And Wendy was really encouraging to me. Sometimes, like after I had my first, I just went over to her house and she let me just lay on the couch and she would play with Rachel. But I remember, saying to her, like, how am I going to be a mom if I'm like in such a bad spot? My kids see me crying all the time or I can't even function, and I just love like what she said was like, well, this is going to teach your children how to be compassionate. And I just love that she said that because it showed me that I don't have to have it all together to be a good mom and that my children can learn positive things through my weaknesses. And I've seen that even in my kids. They are very compassionate. If they see me or somebody crying, they always go over and put their hand on the back. Are you okay? And so I just thought that was such a great piece of advice from her.
Right. What do you do with 5 young children for self-care? How do you make time for yourself?
Well, I feel like I actually am able to do it. My parents, they live right around the block, so they are able to help out quite a bit, which is wonderful.
Yes. But
on a daily basis, I try to spend time in the Word and in prayer, and exercise is really important for me. I find that like it just helps with my mood and whatnot. So I try to find like I typically can do it when I put the little Lydia down for a nap, and then I let Megan and Jesse watch shows. Right. So then they're occupied and she's napping, and then I can exercise. I've also, when I wanted to be running outside, I've traded babysitting with a friend. Like, I'd have a friend over with her kids, and I would watch all the kids, and then she'd go out for a run, and then vice versa. Yeah. So that's worked out well for us, for me. And then I'm also a member of a MOPS group, Mothers and Preschoolers, and I've been a member of that group for like 9 years. So that's been a really great way to meet moms in my area, because I go to church about 25, 30 minutes away. So a lot of my friends are a little bit further. Yes. So it's been really great to meet people in the community. And I've made some really good friendships through that. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, those groups are really helpful if you can
get plugged into one. And I know sometimes it's hard. It's intimidating to put yourself out there those first few times, especially if you don't have the ability to go with someone else
Sure.
But it is so worth it. Even if you have to really like drag yourself kicking and screaming to it, it is so worth
or your
it.
Kids.
Yes.
I know a lot of the moms, it's hard for them because their kids don't like to be in the nursery or whatnot. But it's nice because we have, a meeting once a month and it's always very encouraging topic. And we have mom's night outs and play dates. And I think it's good for the kids. It's good for the mom. You meet other people in your same walk of life.
Right. And I would say too that even if your child doesn't really like it, you're not doing them emotional damage by making them go. They'll be okay. They'll be okay. It really won't scar them in some way. It's not like you're putting them in an unhealthy environment for that hour and a half.
Exactly.
Even if they don't like it, I think we need to be careful not to let the whims of our young ones always dictate what goes on in our lives.
Oh, yeah. Exactly. We have very loving, great volunteers. And, now with all like the clearances and everything, everybody has to have clearances. So we know they're in a safe, good environment.
I would say too, if people out there, if you don't know of a specific group like that, you kind of can form your own in an informal way. It won't be, as structured as something like a MOPS group.
Yeah.
But I know when my kids were little, we didn't have one nearby. And so I just got in the habit of inviting a few other moms that had kids that were preschool age. In the summer, we would meet at a park and bring our lunches, and in the winter we would meet at a fast food restaurant that had an indoor playground, and we would let the kids play while we would sit and talk. And it wasn't as uninterrupted as like a MOPS group where you have childcare available to you, but it was still interacting with other moms in the same spot in life. That was always very encouraging. And I noticed when we would leave, I was happier and the kids were ready for a really good nap. It was a win-win. So,
Exactly.
If you don't have the opportunity to go to something that's structured, there are ways to do similar things like that, that provide the same kind of benefit.
Yep. Yeah.
All right. What would you give as a word of encouragement to that weary mom out there?
I have a few little tips.
Okay.
My first one is that you can do it. It might be hard, but the Lord will give you strength. And He calls us to Him, and we can't. I say you can do it, but I need to say we can't do it on our own.
Right.
And I have found that the hardest times in my life are the ones when I'm growing closer to the Lord, because I know it brings me to my knees where I know I can't do it on my own.
Right.
Another piece of advice is don't be afraid to be open and vulnerable and ask for help. That's one huge thing that I've learned as a mom. I think especially with my pregnancy with my twins, I was really, really sick in the first trimester. And I was on bed rest for the last 5 weeks. So I had to ask for help.
Right.
And I had to accept it. And I think people are so hesitant, but I know people are so willing too.
Right.
And it's a blessing. I've realized that it's a blessing for others to be able to help. And you get to know people in a different way when you're helping them and when they're helping you.
Definitely.
And another piece of advice that I've had different women throughout my life is just it's been really good to have a godly older woman to be kind of like a mentor to me. Either whether it's like informal where we're just friends and we see each other, or more formally that we schedule coffee dates at certain times and whatnot, or do a Bible study together. I think that's been really helpful to me.
Yeah, that's good advice. Well, thank you very much for letting me interview you. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
And I hope you have a really nice day.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye. Thank you for joining us on the No Mom is an Island podcast. We hope that it was an encouragement to you wherever you are in your mothering journey. If you would like to share your story or would like to see something added to our interviews, please contact us at nomomisanisland@gmail.com or send us a message on Facebook or Instagram. Looking for some book recommendations for the summer for you and for your kids? Check out the links in the episode description. Also, if you have enjoyed listening to the stories of other moms, there are 3 ways you can help. You can share the episode with family and friends. An easy way to do that is by sharing the link on Facebook, or you can leave a rating or review for the podcast to help boost the podcast's visibility. And another thing you can do is you can consider contributing to the monthly expenses of hosting this podcast by going to the crowdfunding link in the episode description. Thank you.